sparked a little bit of thought of mine. I've had some recent.
That's dangerous.
It is dangerous. I've had some discussions with people who I respect, trust, really love science. There's one in particular. He says through his study of I think he says quantum chemistry and quantum physics, he's had a lot. He's had a lot less faith in evolution and is starting to think he might be becoming religious.
Yes.
Because he feels like it's actually very hard to create a human being by chance.
Yes.
I don't know if you have anything to say on that. I remember when I was in China and I had, actually when I was in most of my classmates were Central Asian, like from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan and stuff, and they spoke Russian and I spoke English. And the only way we could communicate is in Chinese.
Yes.
And it was pretty funny. He said, do you believe that humans come from monkeys? And he said, yeah, I think so. And then he just laughed at me. He said, I'm a dumbass or whatever in Chinese.
From the goo to you through the zoo.
Yeah. And I don't know, I kind of believe it because I've been brought up to believe it. Now, you as a doctor, you might not. I don't know if you want to speak on it or what your position is. What do you think about it? That's just a personal thing I've been thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite happy to speak on that because there's and I'm going to try and keep it sort of broad brush because obviously there's a whole lot of information. But I think let's go back to some fundamental concepts, right? Firstly, what do you mean by evolution?
Well, presumably that you come from a one cell which started somehow in the ocean and eventually created every life we see today.
Okay. So you're talking about, you're actually mixing, because there are four...
mixing things up.
Well, no, because there are actually four different kinds of evolution.
Oh, right.
Okay, there's chemical evolution, which is... so you've even made an assumption there. You've got one cell. Well, where did the cell come from?
From nothingness.
So your chemical evolution is the idea that non-life, just chemicals in the goo, the primordial soup, and somehow that can organize itself into a cell. Now, the problems. Okay, I'll deal with them sequentially, and I won't. I'll just. So let's just say that the difficulty and the probability of random molecules organizing themselves even into one protein. Okay, because proteins don't just have they have primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures. So they don't just have the length of amino acids, but they also fold themselves into specific shapes like locks and keys and things like that, right? And it's extremely. You have one amino acid out of whack, the whole thing doesn't work. And then where did DNA come from? DNA is information. Okay, do codes write themselves? Do books write themselves? Generally, we don't see that. We see that books need authors and codes need code writers. Okay, and if you and even in a code, right? People say, oh, well, what if there was one missed letter or whatever? You change one letter of computer code, you don't have a viable code that can be replicated. It usually have gibberish. The program doesn't work. So the idea that you can have things replicating after there's a mistake, like somehow the organism survives the mistake, and the mistake can be passed on. So there are a lot of assumptions. So chemical evolution, where basically you can have life from non-life, there's never been any proof of that. No one's ever proven that. No one's been able to replicate, even the creation of a protein. Because here's the problem: what was the original environment? Was it what came first, DNA or RNA? Because you need RNA to make DNA, but you need DNA to make RNA.
I've never heard of RNA.
Okay, DNA is the where the genetic information is stored.
Right.
But RNA is a molecule that's used to actually make the proteins. So RNA reads the DNA along the chain and spits out the proteins.
Right.
But you need those proteins to make DNA.
Right.
See?
Right.
So that's the problem. That's the problem everyone's got, and this is done very well in a number of books where people have tried to calculate the probabilities of even one protein just assembling by chance in a primordial soup. The probability is astronomical. Now, how do you have the DNA molecule being assembled when the proteins are needed to assemble it, but the DNA itself is needed to make the proteins that assemble it? See, so that's a fundamental problem. Second type of evolution, which we do see, is called bacterial evolution. We see that. We actually do see bacteria evolve. So if you define evolution as change over time, yes, I agree with you. Okay, let's give you an example of bacterial evolution. They've done an experiment on, you've heard of E. coli, bacteria that's in poo? Most common.
No.
Okay,
Right,
well,
here
it's
we
called E. coli. Okay, it's the most common, the biggest component of your poo.
Right.
That's why it's called coli, as in from the colon, right? They've done experiments where they've let E. coli replicate and evolve. I mean, bacterial evolution is how antibiotic resistance occurs. I don't know if you know that, but when you know how bugs become resistant to antibiotics through the process of evolution, and why they thought bacteria would be a good test subject is because they replicate so quickly. Like we take 9 months to replicate. Bacteria might take 9 hours. Okay, so and you can have thousands and tens of thousands of generations of E. coli in one sample. When they do that, guess what? So now I'll give you, E. coli is a bacteria that looks like a rod. You've got other bacteria that look like a bunch of grapes.
Right.
Okay. The 40,000 generation of E. coli through evolution stays a rod.
Right.
It doesn't change shape. It doesn't turn into a bunch of grapes. It stays E. coli. You see, so even allowing for bacterial evolution, it's like the man stays a man, right? The third kind of evolution that we do see is speciation, which is where the peppered moth becomes white and black, and where the finch's beak becomes larger or smaller depending on the kind of food it eats.
Right.
We do see that, okay, and no one and most scientists don't dispute that. The fourth kind of evolution is called macroevolution, which is a large change in body plan over time. In other words, the single-celled organism becomes an amphibian. The amphibian evolves into a reptile, and the reptile evolves. Monkey to man is a good one. Monkey to man is a massive change in body plan because the ape pelvis and the ape spine is fundamentally different to ours.
Right.
Yeah, ape spine is like that. Human spine is an S shape. Okay, the skull of an ape is because that they sit far more forward on the spine. So where the spinal, the hole in the skull where the spinal cord goes in, is in a fundamentally different shape, place too. So you see how you need so many major changes if you're going to tweak it. And here's another. So we've never seen any evidence of that. Here's another problem for your theory. The Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is an event 550 million years ago. Now, I'm not one of these Christians that think that the world was created, in 6 days, or not 6 literal days, 6 periods, yes, perhaps, but not. And I don't believe that the Earth is like 10,000 years old or something like that. There are Christians out there that believe that, but I'm not one of them. I accept the age of the Earth and I accept the carbon dating and all that stuff, right? So there was an event 550 million years ago called the Cambrian explosion, where 80% of all the body plans, in other words, the blueprint structures that we see today, appear in the fossil record, just like that.
Right.
Within say, 1 million years, which is an instant in geological time. You don't see in the fossil record gradual transitional change. You see explosion. No, you see an explosion, and then you see a flat line. Then you see an explosion of life forms, and then you see another flat line.
Right.
So I think that the theory that you're talking about is just that, a theory. And Darwin himself said that if we couldn't find transitional forms, you know what I mean by a transitional form?
In-betweens.
In-betweens, okay. Even for example, the eye, they've got fossil evidence of eyes way back, 500 something million years ago. But there's nothing before. Like the eye is still an eye. It's still it's intact.
Yeah.
It's like you got a camera there, right?
Yeah.
It's like finding a camera, but if that camera evolved, you would expect to find a lens somewhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else, the hard drive that's in there somewhere. But no, you see the camera assembled as a camera.
Right.
So that Cambrian explosion event, and you can Google it and you'll see a lot. It's the Achilles heel of Darwinism. They still can't explain it. How is it they all came together at the same time? There's no transitional forms. Darwin himself said that if my theory if there were no transitional forms in the fossil record, my theory would be incorrect. He assumed 150 years ago, or thereabouts, that they would find transitional forms as more fossil studies were done, but guess what? They haven't found them. And that's why if you want to see a good video, it's on YouTube, Darwin's Dilemma.
Okay.
And so I'm skeptical of the evolutionary paradigm, and I think they've got... See, they're the ones... See, here's the thing, Dougal. Let's say you were an evolutionary biologist. I would say to you, you're the one making the claim, you have to back up your theory. I don't have to defend you're the one making the claim, so you've got to give me the evidence to show me that that your theory is true.
So what do you think? Well, what does the consensus say, if there is one? What is is there a scientific consensus? Like, even if the theory is not proven, what do you think most scientists believe?
Well, I think there are two groups of people. The consensus is that. Okay, put aside the people that don't trust the carbon dating and all that. There are some scientists that, but they would be in the minority. I would put the consensus into two groups. There are those that accept the evolutionary paradigm.
Which is what? The evolutionary paradigm.
Which is monkey to man.
Right.
Goo to you through the zoo.
Right.
All right. And they would accept that, but they can't explain it. And evidence of that was in 2018, the Royal Society, which is the most august, scientific body out there. For example, Isaac Newton used to be a member of the Royal Society. Okay, that's how far back it goes. They had a conference to talk about the fact that neo-Darwinism can't explain,
right?
Evolution. They don't have a mechanism. So there are those that accept evolution without evidence. I would probably call that faith.
Right.
And there are those that accept, intelligent design makes the best sense of this. Because again, looking at information and DNA and all that, design requires a designer. We wouldn't, if we saw a bicycle just somewhere, we wouldn't just assume that assembled itself. Books don't write themselves. Codes don't write themselves. Now, those scientists aren't postulating the identity of the designer. So there are many scientists in the intelligent design movement that aren't Christians, right? They just accept that, well, hang on, this looks like there's an intelligence behind this. Even things like, okay, mathematics. Why does math work? I mean, why is 2 and 2 4? Always, everywhere. It was there. 2 and 2 was 4 before evolution occurred. When the Big Bang happened, before there was even an Earth, was 2 and 2 still 4? I would submit that it was. Okay, so how did that happen? And people in the ID movement accept things like consciousness. I mean, where is your consciousness? You. Okay, Dougal Cameron. What are you? Is it just your brain?
I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly. It's like if it's your brain, how is it that when people are clinically brain dead but they're alive?
Yeah.
See? Well, so anyway, we can talk.
Problem. What do you think?
Does that help?
What do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
What do I think about what?
How do we become humans?
I believe, okay, and I think the Bible, rightly understood, can explain pretty much everything. I believe that we were made in the image of God, and I believe that we have a physical and a non-physical part of us. Okay, we're a non-physical spirit or soul. Okay, some people I think they're two separate entities, but that's a theological discussion we won't get into. But let's just call it a soul, right? Okay. I think there's a non-physical, that Dougal Cameron is a person that exists metaphysically. Okay, metaphysically. All right, you exist, and you've existed without the body, metaphysically as a soul. You inhabit that framework that you've got now.
Great, right? Framework.
Yes, exactly. Okay, one day that framework's going to break down and die. But I believe that the soul that's in us doesn't. Okay, and the whole phenomenon of near-death experiences and all that, which we could that'll be another rabbit trail for us. But there's the scientists that believe that, they call it naturalism. Naturalism means that nature is all there is. That's it. There's nothing supernatural. They can't explain where consciousness comes from. They can't explain, because here's a question. You have fun with them. They'll say, "I'm a scientist. I believe in only science." See, even science can't explain science, because science is only experiments. How do you do an experiment on what science is, right? But I'll ask you this question. If let's say you're a hardcore scientist and you say, I ask you, what do you do science with? And they'll say, well, they're going to say my mind, but you can't say that because you're a naturalist. I'm going to ask you where the mind is. So he'll say his brain. I'll do it with my brain. Okay, where did your brain come from? And they'll say, well, I'll ask them, so you believe that your brain is the product of evolution. In other words, it's the end product of a random, unguided process. And I said, and you trust your brain? You see, I believe that my brain is inhabited by my soul, which is a mind that's made in the image of the great mind. See, because it's like, what came first, mind or matter? Minds can create matter, but matter can't create mind. We've never been able to show how matter can create mind. So intelligent design, whether you call it God or whatever, postulates that a mind created the matter, and I'm made in the image of the great mind. I inhabit the matter for now. One day that matter will die, and my mind will go. And according to Christianity, it will go somewhere, and other people will go other way. But that's what, and I believe that until naturalists can fundamentally explain consciousness and those sorts of things, which they can't, okay. Then they've got to give me a better explanation, because I've given you've told me, and hopefully what I've told you. Well, let me ask you: put aside whether you believe it, but has what I told you made sense?
Yeah. Okay,
so it's logically consistent. If there is a great mind, that great mind could have created matter, and he could have created. But if someone doesn't believe me, that's fine. They've got to give me a reply that makes with evidence.
So in terms of what might have actually happened, do you have any idea how physical bodies got to where they are?
Okay, well, how physical bodies got to where do you mean how physical bodies...
Like, have we always been like this, do you think? Or do you think we evolved from something else?
Well, okay. Now here is where, if I believe in the supernatural, okay, which you sort of have to, because if you accept the Big Bang, then really, what was before the Big Bang? Given that all matter, energy, space, and time came into existence at the Big Bang, and if time had a beginning, then what was before? Because the whole concept of before and after relies on time, doesn't it? So nothing was before the Big Bang, as in not just a vacuum, not just empty space, nothing, like because space is a thing. You can travel through it, right? So given that nothing was before the Big Bang, and then we have this universe, then I would submit that that's evidence of a miracle. That's the greatest miracle. And the Bible says that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. So if the great mind behind the universe is that powerful that he can do that, or she can do that, or it, whatever pronoun you want to use, then it's not a problem for that great mind to create different organisms. And the Bible actually says that in Psalm 104. It actually talks about creation and extinction. When God withdraws his spirit, they die. Then he pours out his spirit and he renews the face of the earth. Now, just as God created different animals and lions and tigers and things like that, he also created hominids. People like species like Australopithecines, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Neanderthals. They're all, hominids are human-like creatures, but they're not human beings. And we know that that humans are fundamentally different from any of the other hominids. So you could consider those hominid species just like the great apes. So I just think that, to me, God is a creator who loves to create. Why do people make different kinds of cars? Because they just, they like to make cars. If they like cars, they like to make different ones. If you've already got one, if you've already got the Model T, why make others? Well, we like to create. We're made in the image of God who likes to create. So I believe that the different hominids were just different species. They were created by God. They went extinct. We were created in God's image, and we have that that image of God, that essence that allows us to have language and see. And I was listening to a podcast on this the other day. That seems to be what sets us apart as human beings. We have the ability to have language and symbolism, and no other species have that. And language is just something that's so far apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. Because that's what animals can communicate. I'm not saying that apes don't communicate with it, but they don't use language. They don't use symbolic thought the way humans do. And they've been unable to explain that from a naturalistic perspective. I can say that God gave us something different than He gave the other, and that's why humans have an inherent value. Every human has an inherent value, whether they believe in it or believe in God or don't believe in God. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Do you think this might be hard for you to explain because we don't know?
Yes.
Do you think it might have? Are you saying it might have been possible that the starting point for physical animals was kind of similar to where we are today? That hominid kind of started.
When you say starting point, what do you mean?
Well, do you think the hominid started from a hominid, or do you think it started from something before a hominid, if I'm following you correctly?
Yeah, I don't believe in macroevolution. I don't see any evidence of it, because for a hominid to come from something beforehand, again, you remember that problem of the major changes in body plans? There aren't any transitional forms that we see. What makes more sense to me, and what the fossil record shows, is explosion of species, then an extinction event. See, the event that killed the dinosaurs was only one of a number of extinction events that's occurred throughout the history. Life's actually been on this earth for 3.5 billion years, if you count bacteria, right? And there have been a number of extinction events along the way. So I just believe that God created each body plan, or kind of animal, like, cats. He created a cat-like animal, and you can have big cats and small cats, and perhaps there was some, evolution, for want of a better word, but a lion's basically like a house cat in terms of its sort of basic structure. It's obviously different. You wouldn't have a pet lion. No, a boa constrictor is similar to a garter snake in its basic structure. This one's bigger than the other. A reticulated python is similar to a brown snake. But hominids have got far more. If someone were to show me evidence that, say, Homo erectus evolved from gorillas, but then you got a problem, because they walk erect, and gorillas don't. So that's the fundamental problem we've got. If you were to show me evidence that one group of hominid that walked erect evolved into another group of hominids that walked erect, and there are only minor changes in body plans, and there was evidence of that in that fossil, I would be happy to accept that. But it doesn't change the problem of language, and it doesn't change the issue we've got of where did our culture and symbolic thought come from. The other problem is they keep rewriting the hominid tree.
Right.
Because they used to say that it was, I've actually got a presentation on this at some point later. I can give it to you.
Cool.
They used to say that Australopithecus africanus led to this, led to Homo erectus, led to Homo habilis, led to Neanderthals, led to humans. Well, then they realised that no, Neanderthals didn't lead to humans. They were an evolutionary side branch.
Right.
Then they discover more fossils, and they say that this hominid isn't in the tree, in the chain either. It's an evolutionary side branch.
Right.
So every time they discover new hominids, they have to rewrite the pathway.
Right.
To me, that doesn't sound like a very like a theory that's got a lot of validity. Now, Would you like me to? Okay, well, I'll ask that question a bit later on. But what do you think? Have I answered your question?
Yeah, answered it. What were you going to say?
I was going to say my view on why evolution and naturalism is so popular it was summed up by Aldous Huxley, as it actually said this, and I'm going to paraphrase him because Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World.
Right.
He said, and it was also paraphrased by Christopher Hitchens. You know who he is?
I quite like Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
I was having a talk about him yesterday.
Yeah.
Side note,
Yeah.
I think it seems very strange that I feel like it's his death. I think it was in 2011.
Yeah.
Basically, we see in that exact same time the social justice left
Yes.
come forward.
Yes.
And I think if Hitchens was alive, the social justice left wouldn't be nearly what it was today.
I agree with
Because you look at what Hitchens said about feminism or about Islam, totally different
Yes.
to what the social and he was the big hero of the. I really quite like him.
Yeah, and he was a very good speaker, and he was some of his views were aligned
disagreeable from the Christian perspective.
Oh no, but look, I've seen him debate Christians, and the problem with Hitchens, he's a very good speaker, but he's not necessarily a good philosopher.
Right.
And some of the things he said were, you could easily take them apart. But I like what you said about him. He was. I think you're right about the social justice left. There needs to be people who are calling out the hypocrisy for what it is. Now, Hitchens would talk about we don't need God as some cosmic North Korean dictator peeking into our sex lives.
Right.
Right. Aldous Huxley, decades before that, said, paraphrasing, he said that for him, atheism, materialism, was a means of liberation. He said, liberation to pursue my sexual freedom.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, if there's a God, then you're accountable.
Well, assuming you got the guide, he wants you to do stuff.
Yeah, but let's assume if there's a God, if let's assume I'm right, and let's say the God of the Bible is God, and he's the boss, and you either live by his rules, or you don't, and if you don't, there are consequences. Now, the problem is, and I relate to this because I didn't like this about Christianity before, because I didn't grow up a Christian. I came to faith through a number of circumstances that it's another story, but I had to realize that I wasn't my own boss anymore. And many of us, we want to be our own boss, and so many people will look at whatever they can to maintain that control of their lives, because then they can do what they want. There are no real moral consequences to what they do, or maybe less moral consequences. They're only bound by the law of the land, whereas I'm bound by two laws. I'm bound by the law of the land and the law of God. For example, I'm a single man. Okay, I can't go and just pick up a girl at a nightclub as much as I'd like to, because I have the same desires as anyone else. I'm not single by choice, but people have their own free will, and I was married before, and people make choices, and that was her choice. But and I would say to people, to gay people during the same-sex marriage debate, I would say, look, if you're a Christian and your only option is celibacy, okay, until God brings you a wife, well, same with me. I'm no different. I can't go down to a local nightclub and pick up a girl because the Bible doesn't allow that. If I'm going to live consistently, that's what I have to do. Or I can dump Christianity altogether and just live my own way. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think for a lot of people, that idea of having to surrender their lives to a superior being, it's objectionable. That's just my view. Yeah. And I think Hitchens would have been much the same, and certainly Aldous Huxley was saying that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I've kind of lost where we got up to before we went on the sidetrack of Hitchens. I feel like we were in a good place somewhere.
No. We were talking about evolution. You were talking about. You were basically talking about. I guess why. We talked about the value of religion. Then you talked about evolution, and then we.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think we had a pretty good go of the evolution.
Yes.